Have you ever gone back to a game maybe a year or two later after the hype or those initial expectations have passed, only for it to feel completely different? Maybe you realize that certain majorly disappointing issues aren't so bad after all, that divisive plot decisions now sit pretty well given your increased maturity, or how the franchise now sits from a different perspective. Point being that holistic criticism is just as important as in-the-moment opinions or thoughts as things unfold. We all grow, change tact, reapproach and reappraise pieces of media and art. And that's what makes something like a 30-hour epic video game one of the best creative works to go back to. All of which is to say that marketing can only serve one of these time periods, the most immediate one. Which angles, advertising strategies, and spotlighted gameplay mechanics are going to get customers through the door? How does a company shift as many units as possible in that crucial launch window to guarantee recouping funds? It's a problem tangled up with hype and expectation, as get any part of that potent mixture wrong, and it could be years before your title is fully appreciated. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 7 awesome video games killed by their own marketing. Number 7, Mass Effect 3. At the time, Mass Effect 3 was the symbol of disappointment. Lies from the developers describing a conclusive version of the story that we never got. Essential characters resigned to DLC, essential plot points and explanations tucked away behind a paywall. In short, Mass Effect 3 remains one of the biggest flubs in gaming history, but it's not a bad game or a bad story overall. That's providing that you can discard the marketing and what was said beforehand anyway. Go into Mass Effect 3 not knowing about how BioWare had stated you wouldn't get an A, B, or C ending, pick up the DLC being aware of how this full story is told, and it more than works. Whilst I'll forever hold this up as a black mark in EA's ledger, the Mass Effect trilogy can stand tall. Its finale is a ridiculously intense sequence of events, seeing you do everything from unite the galaxy's races against the Reaper invasion to clearing out portions of Earth's last remaining cities one enemy at a time. If EA ever get round to dropping the Mass Effect HD collection, it should make opinions on this do a full 180. Number 6, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. It's testament to Hideo Kojima's storytelling, world building, and just how much we adored Metal Gear Solid that this wasn't dragged through the muck more at the time. Still, MGS2 is routinely held up as the weakest installment in the franchise and the one with the most sour reputation, all because Kojima and Konami actively lied to everyone in the build-up to release. In a move that you would not get away with anymore, MGS2 was marketed with fake footage, fake trailers, and fake voiceovers, all intended to convince the masses that Solid Snake was the main character for the duration of its runtime. Whilst Kojima probably dodged lawsuits by still delivering the majority of the tanker section shown, we'd all then be treated to another 12 hours of newcomer Raiden discovering his true purpose instead. The whole thing was done as a comment on replicating success. Hideo's comments on digital teaching and information sharing would become incredibly precognitive considering where we are today, but to make this point on authenticity and not yearning for sequels over originality, Kojima had to rip away our expectations and supplant them with something altogether inferior. A game so bold it trolls its audience and gets away with it, for the most part, and I love it so much, that's Metal Gear Solid 2. Number 5, Killzone 2. Speaking of things you wouldn't get away with today, the more distance we get from this and look back, the more absolutely insane it truly was. So back in 2005, Killzone 2 was shown to the public at E3. Many journalists at the time were told it was running in-engine on PlayStation 3. Only it wasn't. Instead, the footage passed off as gameplay was pre-rendered, and the move was ultimately a massive mistake on behalf of PlayStation. Finally revealed in 2017's no-clip documentary The Making of Horizon Zero Dawn, Guerrilla noted that the footage shown at E3 was originally only submitted to Sony as an internal vision video, apparently meant to show what games might look like on the next generation. Killzone 2 itself was in development for PS2 at the time, yet someone at Sony took that footage and just ran with it. PlayStation head Ken Kutaragi even introduced the clip at E3 that year, saying that developers had sent over games that they wanted to show, which could not be further from the truth. In the end, Killzone 2 was a solid enough shooter with great audio design and meaty weapons, but a betrayed public ensured it was one of the lowest selling in the whole series, taking 2 months on sale to even hit 1 million copies worldwide. Number 4, every Wii U game. There's a first time for everything, and none other than Nintendo failing to market their new games console was certainly one for the ages. The Wii U though was a complete disaster, reporting lifetime sales of just 13.56 million units, a paltry number compared to the Xbox 360's 84 million or the PS3 netting 87 million. It was especially insane as the Wii remains one of the highest selling consoles of all time, with 101 million units to its name. For the Wii U though, Nintendo failed to communicate that this was an entirely new system, and not just another gimmicky add-on for what went before. Thus, a ton of games were lost in the shuffle, eventually making their way to Switch many years later. Bayonetta 2, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, Mario Kart 8, New Super Mario Bros., Pokken Tournament, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, and Hyrule Warriors all finally got the recognition they deserve after being ported to a system that people actually owned. This mass transition, which isn't even the full list of games, proved how even Nintendo knew that nobody was ever going to return to their ill-fated former system. Number 3, No Man's Sky. Possibly the biggest example in recent memory of even the developers not knowing what the hell they were marketing or communicating, on its week of launch No Man's Sky was still not done. Honestly though, Hello Games should be championed for getting this over the finish line whatsoever. You have to remember this was a 13-person team, suddenly having all their dreams of mass exposure come true. Regardless of the lies and misinformation that I will get to, the stress and workload that they overcame would have been unlike anything else. Obviously, none of what happened resulted in a positive launch. Creative lead Sean Murray would later comment that in hindsight, he probably shouldn't have agreed to all those press opportunities to sell a version of the game that when he was describing it wasn't really finalized. As game development itself is an incredibly tricky balancing act where even something like 2018's God of War didn't come together until the closing months, this resulted in millions of us getting hyped for a version of No Man's Sky that simply didn't exist. E3 presentations, next generation highlight reels, buzzwords, marketing campaigns, all of it got so far away from 13 people experimenting with the technology of a procedurally generated universe that understandably it was impossible for consumers to look past the negatives. Thankfully, Sean Murray and Hello Games put their money where their mouth is, going silent for 2 years after launch while they worked on overhauling the game for free. To this day, they've released a bunch of additional content packs, multiplayer integration, base building, and various mission systems, finally making the real No Man's Sky into the fabled one that we imagined back in 2016. Number 2, Splinter Cell Conviction. Sometimes all it takes is one disastrous trailer. First impressions do count for a lot when it comes to human or media interactions, and if the first look at the next anticipated installment of something is notably off base, it is a Herculean task to get people back on board. Such was the case with Splinter Cell Conviction. Seeing a total overhaul of the franchise's base mechanics, betas for Conviction shown to press at the time had Sam Fisher able to interact and throw any part of the environment. Chairs, mugs, office equipment, Ubisoft somehow thought that the next evolution of stealth was to defeat your enemies by mashing their faces in with whatever you could pick up. A novel approach, but one utterly despised by fans new and old. 2007's E3 brought about nothing but negativity, and Ubisoft would cancel the game's proposed launch window, announce that Conviction was on hold, and not return to the public eye for another 2 years, all while they figured out what the hell Splinter Cell was supposed to be. The Splinter Cell that finally returned was an altogether sleeker beast. Sam's new Mark and Execute feature meant that you could tear through levels, taking one guy down that would then auto-headshot the next 4. It could certainly be abused and would be perfected in Splinter Cell Blacklist, but Conviction's story centered on a ruthless Sam Fisher tracking the killer of his daughter Sarah. It made thematic sense that his rulebook would go totally out the window, and all that was left is the pursuit of new information. Splinter Cell remains in limbo thanks to the combination of fan backlash to this and Blacklist, plus Michael Ironside's waning health across the 2010s, but there was a lot to love about the Conviction we actually got. And number 1, Brutal Legend. I've repeatedly said that no game has ever disappointed me quite so much as Brutal Legend. Realizing the game's marketing was ostensibly a lie, that the game was nothing like the heavy metal God of War the trailers made it out to be, felt too disingenuous, and I, like many others, labelled it one of the most disappointing games ever. However, going back to it very recently, in a generation dominated by formulas and bankable game design, Brutal Legend has quickly become a personal favourite. Divorced from its misleading advertising, you've got a game that is a real-time strategy, except that you play as the cursor. Summoning units to fight another main character who's doing the same on the other side of the field is a great setup to battles, and you're free to leap into the action yourself, thinning the herd Dynasty Warriors style before busting out a crazy guitar solo that leads the charge to victory. Each unit has a special ability, from standing on a stack of amplifiers to deafen foes, to putting crossbow wielders on your shoulders for a bunch of ranged attacks. Brutal Legend's soundtrack is immaculate. Its characters include Ozzy Osbourne, Rob Halford, Lemmy and Jack Black with Kyle Gass. And combat, though sometimes so crazy the frame rate tanks, is fresh, innovative and very forward thinking. In a medium where so many ideas are thrown to the side because they're quote-unquote too risky, Brutal Legend is well worth your time, providing you can completely discard its former reputation. And those have been my choices for various awesome video games that had god-awful marketing. Let me know your favourites down in the comments below, and please check out the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you soon.